Dr. Harshini, welcome. Welcome to Doctor Diaries by Swasa.
Thank you so much.
Before we start off, into a deep dive of your history and how sleep therapeutics is helping people, I have a question that I wanted to ask. You've done pulmonology, you are now a sleep specialist, and you have also been, of course, an MBBS student and all that. One thing I'm assuming is common is that when you put your stethoscope on and you're looking and listening to a lung of a patient and a breath of a patient, what do you think has changed over the years? Like, what did Dr. Harshini at an MBBS level hear when you were still learning, and what do you hear now?
So in the beginning, when I was carrying a stat, it was more of passion and aggression. Okay. That time we are like, okay, this might be this might be that, this might be some complicated issue.
Yeah.
So we used to feel every patient as a complicated case. Okay. But now after experience, I feel that passion has remained to be the same. But we calm down and we understand that it's the basics first.
Okay.
And then complication later. That's very important thing which I realized as a doctor. So most common things come first. So and people also do ignore most common things in the first place. So this is one thing which I realized over time. And second thing is so patients looking up to doctors. So we used to feel very great at a moment of time, or otherwise when a patient ignores us because we are a junior resident, or otherwise when a patient says that, okay, can I take a second opinion? We used to get angry.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, like, I'm telling you, right? So how does it matter why you should take a second opinion? But now we don't feel it that way. Sometimes even we do take other opinions. So I think that maturity has grown up over a period of time.
So it has become more, the more experienced the
Correct,
doctors
because
get. Yeah.
sometimes simple cases go into complications, which we can feel only with experience. Like we can tell that only with experience. So we are valuing experience more these days.
Yeah.
So rather than when we were young,
Yeah.
we know the subject, they know the subject, so what's a big deal? Now it's not like that. Like we're valuing experience. Second thing is, what case can go into complication? What case can be quite simple, although it looks very complicated, which can be quite simple. So all this we are able to figure out much better and in a matured way. And we don't really get offended when patient says that, okay, let me go for a second opinion. We're in fact happy.
Okay, you're encouraging them.
Let both of us take a second opinion. It's like that.
Okay.
So we are matured right now.
And then keeping on the topic of breath, right? One thing is that you are I'm assuming as a pulmonologist, you're listening to an active patient who's, speaking and, listening to how their breath feels, probably clogged lungs and all that. But then you also now are doing sleep clinic where you are trying to figure out something that a patient is completely in sleep and then they don't know what is happening. And then you have a whole trained team who's trying to figure out what is it that is disturbing the patient. So how does the balance happen between somebody who's, learning how to treat complicated, surgical elements, and then now to, tapping a patient by putting all the electric nodes on them, and you have somebody looking at them for hours together. You have detailed charts of how their sleep cycle is and all that. So how has this journey been for you?
So as a pulmonologist, for us, physical examination is a must.
Okay.
So the patient should be in front of us to give a right diagnosis. Whereas in sleep medicine, even though patient is far off, even they're consulting virtually, still we can diagnose or give a provisional diagnosis. That's one major difference between both the fields. So if a patient who has a simple cough, so it might be a simple viral flu or it can be a lung cancer. So maybe a list of investigations and then ruling out diagnosis and then direct examination of the patient. All this matters a lot as a pulmonologist. But in terms of sleep, although 70% of the sleep issues are again related to airway diseases, even then most of them can be diagnosed virtually. That's one best part with sleep medicine. Second thing is, in pulmonology, there's no much talking business. So you talk to them for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and then you actually understand what investigations are required, and based on that, what treatment is required. Whereas in sleep, unlike the benefit of time in pulmonology, we need to do a lot of counseling. We need to do a long history. And this sleep issue might not have just started a day ago or 2 days ago. It might have started like 10 years ago and then they didn't realize. So we should try to figure out everything which even they didn't realize. So it takes a lot of time for each consultation in sleep. So patience is very key in sleep medicine. So that is the second difference which is there. And third thing is in pulmonology, it's all adrenaline rush for a doctor. Like we are always on heels and then we don't know which patient will collapse all of a sudden.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of ICU care, critical care, and then interventions. So our blood pressures will be always high. So we have a lot of adrenaline rush there. In sleep, it's not like that. But the commonality between both is a great patient satisfaction. Any breathless patient who comes to the casualty and then goes back, breathing very well, so they'll be very happy. That's why I wrote a quote on by myself when I started my first clinic, pulmonology clinic in Warangal. So if you don't breathe, nothing else matters. So
Very true.
So I wrote it by myself by seeing my patients. Because see, one of them, they used to ask me when I took pulmonology and when I joined my residency, at that point of time, people had a great craze for general medicine, but I left my general medicine seat and I took a pulmonology seat.
Oh, okay.
This was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So nobody knew what a pulmonologist was actually doing.
Yes.
And everyone, at least in Telangana, used to call them as TB doctor. So one who sees a TB patient.
Yeah.
So to see a TB patient, like, why do you want to go somewhere else and do this course and all this stuff? So nobody really realized it. So one day my cousin, when he told that, I just closed his nose for a while. And then he was like, what the hell, what are you doing? Like, see, you can't breathe and nothing else matters, right? So that's the value of pulmonology. That's what I used to say. So eventually, I realized I didn't know this before starting sleep medicine practice, that even a sleep deprived patient will feel so. So they'll feel so frustrated. They'll feel that I have everything in life. I just want to sleep one night properly and then I'll die. So this is a common statement which I heard from many patients. So later on, after seeing certain patients, I realized that even sleep deprivation is such a big thing. And most of the times, it's a stigma in sleep medicine.
Yeah.
So if they say I can't sleep, say they have money, they have good name, fame, popularity, everything. They have a good family, good friends, everything. But they're unable to sleep. Now when they go out and they say that I have a problem, I'm unable to sleep. You have everything, why are you unable to sleep?
Yeah.
So this is a common thing which they face. So they stop expressing themselves also. So this is one thing which actually causes them a lot of pain and stress inside. So now when they express it out and when we are diagnosing it, when we are curing these issues, so patients feel really happy. So that happiness and satisfaction is the commonality between both, although there are some differences.
So many differences.
Yeah, of course.
When you are looking at, especially from an eye of a sleep specialist, when you're looking at all of the problems that your patients talk about, how much of it is a physical manifestation where maybe they're overweight and they have lifestyle choices? But are there cases where sleep deprivation is like a mental manifestation, where it's happened because of maybe some sort of an emotional trauma or stress in their life? Is that also a case that you come across?
Yeah, majority of the sleeplessness patients. So there are categories of sleep disorders where sleep is related to airway issues, which is still 70% of sleep medicine. But at the same time, there's a rising trend in insomnia, which is sleeplessness. And there's a rising trend in parasomnias, which is sleep talking, sleep walking, so shouting and screaming in sleep, nightmares, and sleep paralysis. So all these are one segment. So there is a rise in these cases now. So the statistics which says 70% are snoring and sleep apnea. Now I think more than that, this incidence is also rising. And the reason is lifestyle, stress, and poor sleep hygiene. And also they think that many people nowadays, they're thinking we are ambitious, we are thinking about our productivity. So maybe we can compromise on an hour of sleep. They feel that sleep is a luxury. But sleep is not a luxury. It's a necessity. Now, when people start thinking that sleep is a luxury, insomnia, sleeplessness, and these parasomnias, all the stress-induced sleep issues are on rise. And it's actually a silent epidemic now.
So I'm assuming that you've seen patients who speak when they're asleep, who are yelling when they're asleep. And then is it treated via medication or is it counseling that is needed for them? Because I understand that a psychiatric consultation is also something that you also look at. So how do you tackle somebody who shows signs of maybe not violent behavior, but behavior that is not common when we are asleep?
Correct. So generally the sleep talking, sleepwalking, screaming, paralysis, sleep paralysis. So all these things can be acquired genetically also.
Okay.
But if you have a proper lifestyle, if you have good stress management, they may not be presented after 18 years of age. So only when you're very stressful, that time only there's 1 or 2 presentations which are seen. But when there's no stress management, then we see a lot of these issues. This is point number 1. Point number 2 is, so many people, they do get confused if it's a psychiatric issue or is it a sleep issue. So first thing what we do is we try to figure out. So we talk to the patient, we try to identify if it's a psychiatric issue or a sleep issue. Sometimes it could be associated with depression, anxiety, schizophrenias and all these problems. And then we do direct to a psychiatrist where counseling will be the first place. And we have certain behavioral therapies, certain cognitive behavioral therapies. After that, we try to put them on medication. So suppose somebody is having severe issue, we directly put them on medication and then slowly taper them and put on some behavior therapies. This is a psychiatric part to it.
Okay.
But when it is coming to sleep, we try to actually differentiate 3 things.
Okay.
If it's a physical sleep health issue, which is diagnosed on a sleep study, if it's a mental sleep health issue, like associated with depression, anxiety or stress, or if it's a lifestyle issue, say they're watching screen all the time at night, purposefully they're awake and they're watching Netflix and they're sleeping in the morning. So these are all behavioral sleep health issues. So we try to place them in these 3 categories.
Okay.
And then we try to do a sleep study if it's a physical sleep health issue. If not, we go for behavioral and cognitive behavior therapies. And then certain severe patients, we put them on medication.
Okay.
So there's a lot of classification of these patients also. Also for us, their lifestyle matters a lot. So we counsel them very well that they have to change their lifestyle by themselves. Because only medication, if you put only on some certain sleep medication, there are a lot of people who come in their 20s and 30s also. So imagine a 20-year-old guy or a girl taking a sleep pill and then how long they have to live on a sleep pill. So it's practically not possible. So we try to induce or introduce other alternative modes of treatment, like practicing deep breathing exercises or behavioral therapies and all this stuff, so that we can remove the medicine as soon as possible.
No, on the topic of this screens and watching Netflix late night and all that, one thing that has become common, especially in younger people, is that you do your job from some time to some time in the evening, you go home or you go to a hostel or something, and then these phones are always with us, right? So the world opens up late in night on your bed, right? Let's say somebody has started to get into the habit of sleeping at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and they only fall asleep with the blue light on, right? What does it take for us to correct that later? Like how much effort does it take to actually correct that part of, okay, we have to wake up in the morning? Because from what we understand, healthy life would be waking up in the morning, taking sunlight before 10 a.m. for some time and all of this. But if somebody's got used to that lifestyle, what does it take for them to change that lifestyle?
So first thing, it takes a lot of effort because, for example, if a chain smoker has to stop smoking, how much ever effort he has to put, the same amount of effort somebody has to put to stop watching screen at night. They're getting used to it.
Okay.
I think that's the simplest way of presenting how much effort is required. And it's as good as quitting alcohol, smoke, or any drugs, in fact.
Oh,
It is
wow.
that much effort which takes.
Hmm.
So this is the first point. Second point is it takes a great toll on your health.
Hmm.
So watching screens at night means the screen is emitting blue light. Blue light is cutting down your melatonin, which you must have acquired from all the day through sunlight. So now when it's cutting down the melatonin, you're not feeling asleep. So you fall in a cycle. Because you're not feeling asleep, you're watching screen. Because you're watching screen, you're not feeling asleep.
It's a cycle. Yeah.
So it's cycle, and then Netflix has so many episodes, right? So they keep on watching, and then they sleep at 2, 3, or sometimes even more than that. So their internal biological clock starts mismatch with the external clock. Now, when they want to get up to some meeting, when they want to get up to their work or anything, they will not be able to do that. After a couple of months, when they realize also, it's very hard for them to push this cycle. So this creates a lot of health consequences as well. Because they're not sleeping in the right time, their hormonal imbalance is going to be created.
Yeah.
So these hormones include many things.
Yeah.
Insulin and metabolic hormones, fertility hormone.
Yeah.
So many things. So they start developing fatigue, the creativity drops, memory issues sets in, concentration issues will be coming up. So entire performance in the daytime will be getting affected. So by the moment they realize that all this is happening because of sleep, it will be at least 2 to 3 years.
Oh.
A simple habit will turn into low productivity person with physical or mental health issues. So
I am sure that, whoever's going to view this conversation that we are having, all of them, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to watch it
in the night.
in the night.
See, I'll tell you one joke. When the highest number of appointments we get is from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. So we started putting ads even at the same time because they're unable to fall asleep. So it's like that. So most of the people, they do watch screens, they do watch such content, even such content in the night time.
In the night. Yeah, it's the irony is very clear.
That's the irony.
Yeah. And to go back to, signs of what can be the early signs, I know that snoring is, in India, we've seen this conversation before. In India, snoring is taken as, it's okay, everybody snores. Dad is too tired, so he snores very loudly when he's tired and all that. But, from a perspective of somebody who's a sleep specialist, you would probably call that as the first red flag, right?
Correct. So in COVID, if anyone is coughing, how people used to see them. If anyone is snoring, I look at them like that. That's that much of red flag. I do take it because see, snoring is a proper airway issue. So when do you get a sound or a noise? When there's a, if you're opening the door like half open, then if air is gushing out through it, then that time we get a sound, noisy sound, right? It's the same way with airway. If it is half open or less than half open and air is gushing through that half open airway, that is when you're getting the sound, and that sound is called snoring. So that means if you're snoring, your airway is just half open.
Yeah.
If your airway is just half open, the amount of oxygen is just half. The amount of oxygen, if it's half, your brain is not getting oxygen, your organs are not getting oxygen. So in your sleep, you're oxygen deprived. And how many hours in a day are you in sleep? At least for 8 to 10 hours?
Yeah.
On a whole?
Yeah.
So minimum to minimum 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah.
So in 24 hours, nearly 1/4 of the time you're in sleep, and nearly 1/4 of the time you're lack of oxygen.
Yeah.
That's why snoring is very alarming. So if you calculate the number of hours in a year, imagine how much lack of oxygen your body is having. So now this triggers your brain to give a signal to wake up, disturbing your sleep, disturbing your hormonal balance. This triggers your heart. So heart will try to pump at a much higher rate to compensate this lack of oxygen.
Okay.
So that's why if you see, there are so many cardiac arrests at night while sleeping. So there are so many silent heart attacks. There are so many youngsters who die in the gym because when they are gymming or when they're doing high intensity exercises, they need a lot of oxygen. From where do they get oxygen? It's stored in the muscles, it's stored in the organs. So your muscles don't have any oxygen because you're already deprived at the night time. And this deprivation led to all the usage of all the stored oxygen. Now when you are exercising, from where do you get the stored oxygen? So that is, even heart is a muscle. It will go into fatigue and stop functioning. So that's why many youngsters die in the gym. Many 40 to 50-year-old die in sleep. And many people, now if you see, most of the youngsters are hypertensives.
Yeah.
So all this is because of snoring. That's why that's why, as I said, if somebody is coughing, however you see them in COVID time, I see a snorer like that because I know the future.
So I think what is the most alarming, or what I was not able to connect this until you mentioned, is that, everybody talks about health these days, be in the gym, get to the gym in the morning, and then, you have to hustle to, your work and all of that. You're spending long hours at your desk, eat right. And yes, they do mention that you have to sleep right. But I think it gets pushed under the other layers, right? Your nutrition comes, there's a lot of marketing for nutrition, if I could say so, right? And then there's a lot of, your gymming has to come first. But I think if you don't sleep well, none of these, your body would not be able to recover, even if you have your food on time, or probably your gymming is on time and all of that, because that is where you're actually supposed to rest, and your body is actually in its natural state of recovering, right?
Correct. See, sleep is basically for rest, recovery, and restoration.
Yeah.
So, if you don't eat food, which you're valuing so much, if you don't eat food for 2 days also, still whatever fat and adipose tissue you have, that will be utilized as energy. So, there's no problem if you don't eat for 2 days. If you don't exercise for 6 months, still it's fine. So, because how many of the people like maybe 2 generations before were exercising in gym?
Yeah.
Right? So, even if you don't exercise also, you might be fine. But if you don't sleep and you do the other 2 things, there's no use. In fact, there are some unnecessary adverse effects. You're not sleeping, you're exercising. So you're not sleeping, there is no rest and recovery to the body. Already all through the day you've been working.
Yeah.
Your physical activity, mental activity, you're doing so much. And you're not giving rest to your organs at night. On the top of it, you're overloading it with exercise.
Yeah.
So do you really think that your body is going to function like that?
Yeah.
So sleep is much more important than your diet and exercise as well.
Yeah.
So sleep is not just in terms of duration, but in terms of quality also.
Quality. Yeah.
So the moment somebody is not giving importance to sleep, they're giving importance to everything else. So I think that's one thing they should again rethink about.
Yeah. And, because you mentioned quality of sleep, the common pointers that we are given normally is that, keep your phone away, or your blue screen away, blue light away for maybe the hour before you sleep, maybe don't eat for right before you sleep, and all of this. But is there something that is probably common that people miss when it comes to falling asleep quickly, but again, falling asleep deeper?
So I feel most of people don't know about sleep hygiene. So your good quality sleep starts with the morning. Once you wake up, you need to have good sunlight exposure.
Yeah.
So before 10 a.m. So that should be at least 15 minutes to 30 minutes. Second thing is their food timing should be regular. And third thing is any alcohol intake or smoking, vaping, these things are going to ruin your sleep. Black coffee is good for your health, good for your liver, gut metabolism, everything, but not after 4 p.m.
Okay.
In fact, not after 12 p.m.
Okay.
But somebody who has a very good metabolic rate, very good sleep, then maybe not after 4 p.m. So taking some good dry fruits, balanced food, which has carbs, fats, proteins, minerals, everything. So because these days many times I say keto diet alone.
Yeah.
There's no carb, there's no protein. So something like this. So those crash diets are not really going to help you sleep better. You should have a balanced diet. And next thing is not giving shock to your body by sleeping at different timings. No sleep shocks.
Okay.
So if you're used to sleeping at 11 p.m., sleep at 11 p.m. If you have a party, at the most you can sleep by 12 a.m. But not at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. And not continuously. So once in a while, maybe you have a flight, maybe you have an important thing, you might have missed your sleep, but not continuously. So if you're shocking your body by sleeping 7 p.m. one day, 12 one day, and then 3 one day, this is not going to be of good quality. So no sleep shocks. Maximum of half an hour difference is acceptable. And the ambience of room, the clothes you're wearing, all this makes a big role.
Okay.
So when I say ambience of the room, I generally say that your partner's snore also is included in the ambience of the room. So that is a loud sound again. So it might be disturbing your sleep. So all these, when considered and when, followed properly, these were followed like for ages for very long time without any question and answer session. But these days, unfortunately, because of our lifestyle issues, these things are taken for granted.
Yeah.
So when we are missing out on these basic points, the quality of sleep gets affected.
Yeah.
And many people, they also think that eating biryani at late night, sleeping with full stomach, or consuming a little bit of alcohol, or otherwise exercising late night may make them feel tired and they can fall asleep better. So all these are myths related to sleep again. So not falling for the myths, but actually having some light food as dinner, finishing dinner 1 to 2 hours before sleep, and not exercising after 7 p.m. So all this is going to promote a quality sleep.
Yeah.
So these points, when people miss out, they generally fall into sleep issues.
Yeah.
And almost 30% of our patients, they just don't follow either of the point. And that's the reason they're with us. So when we educate them, when they start following this, they're much better. They need not come back again. So, and one thing is 30% is a big number. I don't even write medication for 30% of my patients.
It's just a change in,
It's just a change in the very normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when see, the internet now has given access to knowledge to everybody about that, right? So you see advertisements regarding maybe supplements like magnesium glycinate as an example. As a sleep specialist, would you suggest that anybody takes these, or are they supposed to be taken by only after certain tests are done, or what would you suggest people do?
So for vitamin D, for B12, iron, these are the things which tests are mandatory. So you should not pop up any pill just like that, because vitamin D, when consumed in excess, can cause gastric issues, can cause hypervitaminosis, and it can cause multiple other issues also. There's a very big list where hypervitaminosis also is a problem.
Okay.
So again, low vitamin, of course, appropriately supplemented. So it's very important to get the test done. For magnesium, even though you test it, the requirement is 1.5 mg or maximum 2 mg. So most of the people do fall in that range, but cellular level, they might be having some magnesium deficiency. So magnesium can be taken, 440 mg magnesium glycinate. So it can be taken at night especially, but not more than 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
So when you're taking more than 2 or 3 months, again, the excess magnesium is not going to help you and it's just going to wash away from your body. So we should not really overload ourselves by popping multivitamins, but we should use them as and when required in an adequate dosage.
Makes sense. So just to take a step back, right? We can go back to your journey, and I also wanted to know that your specialization. I was reading somewhere that you're a pioneer in sleep specialty in India, and would you encourage students now to get into this role? Because I understand that you also said that 1 in 5 people are somewhere suffering with a sleep disorder, and it's not they don't know. And like you were mentioning, in India, it's even snoring is not taken as a red flag where it's supposed to be, right? Would you encourage students to follow your path now?
100% yes. Because even when I was choosing this, even I was not sure whether, actually, theoretically, as per research papers, a lot of people who are suffering from sleep issues. And when I was practicing interventional pulmonology, also I used to see a lot of people coming and they're asking about sleep problems. But how far people will take it seriously and how far they'll go for diagnosis and treatment? This was a question which I had, practically speaking, because you're talking about the career.
Yeah, of course.
So when I started, the moment we placed the board, there were quite good number of walk-ins. So that made me realize that, okay, practically there are so many people who are willing to take treatment, who are suffering a lot and willing to take treatment. And the last 2 years of our journey, you can see that from one branch, we expanded to the second branch as well. So that itself says that there are quite a lot of patients who are willing to take treatment. And if you're treating them properly, then there's a huge satisfaction for them as well as for you. And it's definitely a very good career option. So most of the pulmonologists do choose sleep medicine, but physicians can do fellowships and psychiatrists can do. So the family medicine can do. There are quite a lot of people who can do fellowships. Although it's not really accepted as a fellowship in India.
Okay.
But as pulmonologist or as a psychiatrist, you can definitely, or a neurologist, you can practice sleep medicine. So practicing sleep medicine is definitely suggested. I would suggest students to take up this field for sure. Second thing is, there are other courses apart from sleep medicine doctor, like sleep technologist, sleep technician, so sleep counselor. So all these are something which is going to come up in a big way in future. So for example, when I started the center, if I had to hire a sleep technician to perform a sleep study, so I didn't find hardly any. So I had to hire some EEG technicians, train them about sleep technician stuff, and then qualify them with certain, other universities and then hire them. So every time one person leaves, I still struggle to get a sleep technician.
Wow.
So sleep technician course is a big thing. Next thing, sleep technologist. So technologists actually, they read the report. So, and they report all the sleep studies. So all the sleep studies are technically reported by the sleep technologist.
Okay.
Doctors can do them as well, but we don't find time to do reporting, right?
Of course.
So if somebody is doing a sleep technology course, even sitting from their house, they can report it to any country. So you can have work from home even in a medical field. That is sleep technology course.
Okay.
So I do recommend all these courses because sleep medicine is going to be the future.
Okay. And coming to this topic about how, there's so many different people within the world of sleep specialization, right, who would look at a patient and they would look at them for different reasons, right? How would you say in today's world, technology is actually helping all, bring the right patient information to the right specialist, or helping somebody decode the information in a quicker, more safer way?
So, to my knowledge, technology is quite helpful because, there's something called sleep tracker. So, if you heard about it, Apple Watch has sleep tracking.
Yeah.
Fitbit.
I was going to bring this up.
Yeah. Gabit and Aura, so many rings, bands, and watches, they all have sleep tracking. So, when you wear them, they're all wearable tech-based devices. So when you wear them and when you're sleeping, initially we used to give people sleep diaries. So we used to ask them, mention at what time they're going to bed, what time they're sleeping, in between how many times they're waking up, when they have a coffee and all this stuff. Now, is it really possible to remember everything, how many times you woke up and all this stuff? And you have a stress behind your head that I have to write this. So you may not fall asleep also. This is eased out by sleep trackers. And second thing is, somebody may sleep well 3 days a week, they might not sleep 4 days a week. This pattern is possible. So whether it is regular, irregular, or how is the pattern? So if you want to study this, we need sleep trackers. Because every day we can't keep doing sleep studies.
Yeah, of course.
Now, all of this is coming up in your regular watch or a simple wearable device where people can afford it. So previously there were actigraphy watches.
Okay.
That was exclusively for sleep tracking. So now that was 1 lakh or 1.5 lakh. So only wearing something only for your sleep tracking doesn't make much sense. Because sometimes people may just want to track for 1 month and show the data to doctor.
Yeah.
Now why should they buy that 1.5 lakh watch? Now if even in 10,000, 12,000 also you're finding something which can track your sleep. So that way technology is coming out in a good way, which is helping the patient as a and the doctor as well for diagnosis purpose. Second thing is, of course, it's creating some amount of anxiety. So patients are getting used to it. And now if the watch says you slept 10 minutes less than what you're sleeping, now the patient is feeling anxious. Okay, I slept 10 minutes less today. Can I function or not? So we should balance it and use it only in the positive way. That's
No
one
over dependence or under
dependence. Exactly. Second thing is in our treatment devices. So we use something called CPAP devices. So these CPAP devices are cloud-based connectivity these days.
Oh, okay.
So few of our patients we have from New Zealand, USA, or otherwise some remote villages or districts in India as well. So when the distance is very far off, we give the patient a device. We ask them to use it at night while sleeping. So when they're using this device, we need to really understand if the patient is using well or not. And after 1 month, what is the result? So technically, patient has to travel all the way every month to show us the report and the device. Because of this technology-driven cloud-based connectivity, now everything is on our desk. So we used to push in sleep medicine, the main thing is compliance. So people use it for 2-3 days and then once they feel better, they leave it.
Okay.
So now the rest of 27 days, they might not use and they might come back with the recurrence of the problem. Now, since we are having the AirView account, all our patients' data is being projected on the account. So every day we can see if all the patients use their device last night or not. Of course, we can get some more reports and details. So the patient need not travel just to show us the report. We can do an online consultation based on the cloud-based. We can even change the settings of the device right from our software.
Oh, okay.
So this is reducing the cost of travel, time management, and so many things.
The setting would be something like how much air is supposed to go in, things like this.
Yeah, how much pressure it should go.
Yeah.
And what should be the smoothness of the flow and all these things. And at what time, what pressure should be given. So all these are settings in the device. Now, which cannot be made by a patient.
Yeah.
So that we have to do it. And for that simple purpose, we need not call the patient from far off places.
Yeah.
So that is how technology is supporting in treatment also. See, and patients can't lie to us anymore. They can't say that, doctor, I use this device for 1 month, but still your treatment didn't work. They can't do that because the machine is giving us an entire report of how many hours they're using, what's the quality, how much reduction and all this. And in the next level, even the patients are having their apps connected to the devices. So they can also see how much they're using, they're getting better. So this will encourage them to use the next day.
Yeah.
So it's increasing the compliance of the treatment. And it's helping a lot in the treatment purpose, especially for sleep apnea patients also. Next thing is we have cognitive behavior therapy apps, some kind of music. So there's some music therapy and certain times there is guided meditation. There is a tool called BrainTap. So it is a guided meditation. Technically in ancient Indian culture, if a guru is sitting and he is chanting some slogans and that has music or those words has a frequency where your brain is able to reduce the hustle to a calm state of mind. Now this is called guided meditation, which was done like some, hundreds of years ago. Now that everyone can't find a guru or they're not interested, they might feel boring and so many things. Now there are some guided meditation tools like BrainTap. They're like headphones.
Okay.
You just put the headphones and there's a goggles in front of you. So it'll give you, it'll cancel the white noise. It'll give you some sounds which can reduce your brain waves from a hustle state to calm state. And it also projects certain lights which will actually make you feel relaxed. So all this is technology now. So all this is a very great help to the patient.
It's awesome. Regarding this sleep apnea, especially because, I think a lot of elder, patients I've heard have sleep apnea. Indians, with higher fat percentages have sleep apnea. Is it like a lifelong disease where they have to put the CPAP machine every day, or does it get cured with, maybe lifestyle changes and then medication, and then you slowly can get off the CPAP reliance? What is the current state?
So it's two-way thing. There are people who are obese and they have sleep apnea because of the fat tissue around their neck, and they'll have to use a CPAP. There are patients who are lean, fit, they are athletes. So they're very lean. They don't have any fat or obesity, they're very fit. But still they'll have to use CPAP because of sleep apnea. Group A patients, when they lose weight, there's a high chance that they can get rid of CPAP. It's not a lifetime thing.
Okay.
So many people got rid of it as well. Group B patients, they might be having internal obstructions, maybe some adenoid issue, tonsils, or otherwise sinus issue, allergies. So all these airway issues might be triggering their sleep apnea. Few people it is correctable surgically.
Okay.
In few people we can use mandible advancement devices. Few people we can also use negative suction pressure devices. And in few people there's no choice but to use CPAP for lifetime. So it's completely subjective. But at the same time, these days what we are observing is more of lean patients getting sleep apnea.
Oh, okay.
Maybe because of the allergies. So there's a lot of pollution triggering sinus issues, asthma, and this is triggering airway issues, and that's causing sleep apnea. Now, until and unless you treat the allergy part, so you cannot really say that we can reduce sleep apnea.
Okay.
So it depends.
This is very subjective.
But any obese person, they can have a positive hope of losing CPAP by losing weight.
Yeah. Okay. It's good to know. I think one more layer of what we wanted to speak to you about is when you're looking at your patients, especially in the last 2 years since you've started this journey, right? What do you think is, this should have been got earlier. You've already had enough, red flag. You've come in too late. This should have been preventive rather than you coming now, right? What do you think would be or maybe you can share one patient journey, if you're comfortable in saying that, had it just been a small change much earlier, it wouldn't have reached this level.
Yeah. So there are a lot of patients where I feel this. Maybe 50% of my OPD, every day I feel this.
Okay.
So because of the lack of awareness, see, people, they think snoring is normal. 10 years they might have snored. Okay. This snorer landed up in a hypertensive state. They landed up in ICUs. They had heart failure. They're on multiple medications. They became diabetic. They have multiple medications. Maybe they had stroke. Okay. And they have all this paralysis and all these issues. Now they're coming up asking what could be the root cause. A simple snoring which could be treated with a simple CPAP might be the root cause for all this.
Yeah.
Definitely I feel that, okay, we'll try to do it, but definitely we can't reverse 10 years old diabetes.
Yeah.
We can get him to a better state, but not a normal. So that is the time when we feel this patient must have come earlier. It must be only 10 years journey, but his age would have been only 35 or 40. So just imagine how early is it to get all these issues.
Yeah.
This is one point. Second point, this snorer's wife who has been sleepless for last 10-15 years is now asking for a pill. Rather, if she would have avoided sleeping in other room, which we call sleep divorce recently.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you get your husband treated and both of you would have not been on medical bills. So that is the second case when we feel that this patient would have come early.
It's not just for one person. You have added on effects onto your partner or somebody else.
Yeah. And there's a third case where you had social embarrassments. You lost your job because you're sleeping in the daytime. You lost your job maybe because you didn't have good productivity, good concentration, even though you are quite talented and all that. You lost your confidence. You have emotional and mental health issues. You have divorce in the family because of all this, financial problems you're facing. Or otherwise, A sleep apnea patient can have daytime sleepiness, irritability. He cannot even tolerate his child shouting in a louder voice, or he keeps screaming at his wife, which leads to family issues. So now all this takes a big toll on the life, and then he comes back and then asks for treatment. Provided you would have come early, maybe 5 years back or so, you would have a better social life, better family life, and a better health as well. So this is another case where we feel, okay, you must have come early.
Do you think, in places now you are here and now sleep therapeutics is here, but who might be the right person to go when, let's say, viewers slowly realize that maybe they're snoring, their partners tell them, who might be the right specialist? Do they directly go to a specialist, or would a general physician be able to guide them well? Maybe the family doctor. Where do you think the journey should start ideally?
So in India, we're very fortunate because our next door will be a specialist. In no other country in the world, every next door will have a specialist. So that is one great thing with our country. So I think every person should use the specialist care directly.
Specialist care directly.
Exactly. Why? Because unfortunately, even in the medical fraternity, see, when you go to a hospital, you must have gone multiple times, right?
Yeah.
So they check your pulse, BP, oxygen levels.
Yeah.
Okay. They ask what you're eating. They ask how many times you're eating outside, how much exercise you're doing. How many doctors actually asked you how many hours you're sleeping and how is the quality of your sleep?
Yeah.
Just try to remember in your all doctor consultations, how many doctors?
Yeah.
Exactly. So unfortunately, in medical fraternity also, we ignore sleep. So we don't really talk about sleep. We even ask if you're doing yoga or if you're doing brisk walking. We take time to ask what type of exercise you're doing.
Yeah.
But nobody takes out the time to actually ask whether the person is sleeping or not. And even if a person complains that I'm sleepless, still it is ignored. It's okay, fine, you're just feeling anxious. Do some walk and then go to sleep. So this is the problem with even the general practitioners. It's very unfortunate, but this is there. So that's the reason awareness should be there both in medical fraternity as well as common public. Since there's no much awareness about sleep in medical fraternity, we recommend every patient who is suffering from a sleep issue to go to a specialist.
Okay.
So unlike fevers, say there's a fever, I don't ask them directly to come to a pulmonologist. They can go to a physician, they can get evaluated. Later, if required, they can come to a pulmonologist. So, but in sleep, that is not the case. Second thing is we have 2-3 added-on advantages in India. In USA or in Canada, New Zealand, anywhere where there are sleep centers, the sleep study cost is 100 times more than what is there in India.
Oh, okay.
A sleep consultation takes more than 3 months, to get it. And even after a sleep study, if you want to really get a device, you need to answer 100 questions from your insurance.
Yeah.
Here we don't have that problem.
Okay.
So sleep specialist is available, sleep centers are available. You can walk in, get a study done. So the problem here is lack of awareness, and we don't know that we have to go.
Yeah.
So
it's just about breaking the stigma and then taking that call of going to the specialist.
Correct. And men do come when they have a snoring issue if the wives push.
Yeah.
But when it is reverse, when a wife is snoring, now the husband feels embarrassed to bring her and the wife feels embarrassed to come. So now, I mean, there's nothing to feel embarrassed about snoring. So these days, people are talking about mental health, suicides and everything. So why feel embarrassed about snoring?
That's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I think, before we wrap up our conversation, something very basic that I would ask is, when do you think is somebody's earliest sign for coming? Is there an age that you would say that, okay, now maybe you are in the early 20s and you started to snore? Or maybe that, now you have a job, you've unfortunately or fortunately taken a night shift, things like this. When do you think somebody has to put up a real conscious effort into saying that I might be sleeping wrong? I don't think anybody really ever asks themselves that question of sleep is something that you would naturally fall asleep, right? But to think that you might actually be doing it wrong, or there is a right way or a better way to do it, isn't something that crosses everyone's mind.
Correct. So yesterday we did a sleep study, and the age of patient is 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah, it's a 3 months old patient.
Wow.
So he's having a sleep issue and a severe sleep issue.
Huh.
So there's no age where you should get alarmed. The moment you realize that sleep is an important thing, you should think about your sleep, and if you feel it's abnormal, you should be alarmed, irrespective of your age. So my mother, who is 65 years old right now, that was the first sleep study I've done. Because nobody believes in my sleep machine as so you need to get some rats, right? So it was my husband and my mother who took the sleep test.
Okay.
In the first place. So my mother's sleep report is the best report I've seen till date. 99% sleep efficiency.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So I see so many, like I said, 3 months old. I see many 20 years old, 10 years old, 30 years old, many different various age groups so far who have severe sleep issues. So there's no age limit for sleep disorder or for a good sleep. 1 point. Second point is, do you need to really think about it, feel anxious, or take care of it? So for that question, of course, you should think about your sleep once. So in case your duration of sleep as an adult, it is for 6 to 8 hours, and your quality is good. Quality as in, the moment you fall asleep, within half an hour, you're able to fall asleep. In between, you're not waking up too many times. Even if you wake up once, you're able to fall asleep again. The next day, you're feeling fresh, and your entire day, you're active and productive. That means your sleep is good. So you need not consult anyone. You're fine. And there's nothing else to do. Just don't ruin your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Just follow the sleep hygiene and that's it. But if anyone is not having any of these things, first thing they should see is their lifestyle and their sleep hygiene, like we discussed before. If any point is not going well, they should correct that. Even after correcting that, still there's a problem. Then they should come to a specialist.
Okay.
So, and this is irrespective of their age. So, above 14, 15 years, most of the people, they are aware about these things now. So, it's not like 20, 25 also. Nowadays, 14, 15-year kids, they're quite aware of the health issues.
Yeah.
And they can monitor on their own. Below 14 years of age, the parents should watch them. So, parents should see the signs of any sleep issues. Say, in kids, somebody will have mouth breathing. They'll be snoring at night. They'll be like passing urine multiple times. Even after 7 years of age, they'll be having nightmares. So at that time, they should definitely bring. So parents and teachers should watch kids. Post 14 years of age, I think you can watch for yourself.
I think it's been a very delightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you once again.
Thank you so much. And it's very, I think you took a very good initiative in promoting sleep awareness. And I congratulate on that. And thank you so much for invitation.
Thank you so much.